Have you ever had one of those brilliant middle of the night ideas and thought, how do I make sure nobody steals this? Well, today we're going to crack open the Creator's Toolbox and look at the essential tools for protecting your intellectual property. Because let's be honest, without them, even the most amazing ideas are pretty vulnerable.
I mean, just imagine it for a second. You've built an incredible brand, sales are through the roof, everything is going great, and then boom, a copycat shows up out of nowhere. What do you do? And this isn't just some hypothetical question. It happens all the time.
Let's look at a real-world story. There was a company, JD Beverage, and they created Hot Lips Vodka. Came with this really distinctive puckered lips logo. And it was a hit, but then a competitor comes along and launches Kiss Vodka using a logo that looked suspiciously similar. This is a classic case of IP confusion, and it shows you exactly why you need to reach into that creator's toolbox for the very first tool. So that first tool we're pulling out is the trademark. Now, a trademark isn't about protecting the product itself, the actual vodka in the bottle. It's all about protecting the brand's identity. It's how your customers find you in a super crowded marketplace. At its core, a trademark is what the law calls a source indicator. Its entire job is to tell the world, hey, this thing right here, it comes from this one specific company. So when you see that puckered lips logo, you're supposed to think of Hot Lips Vodka and nothing else. The whole goal is to avoid confusing you, the customer.
And this is not some newfangled idea. Way back in 1920, there was a famous case involving Coca-Cola, and Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. just nailed it. He said, a trademark comes to mean a single thing coming from a single source. Think about it. When you hear Coca-Cola, you don't just think of any cola. You think of a very, very specific one. That's the power of a strong trademark.
But here's the thing, not all trademarks are created equal. The absolute strongest ones are what we call fanciful or arbitrary. Think of words like Xerox or Google. They were basically made up or had nothing to do with the product. On the other end of the spectrum, you have generic terms like computer or bicycle. You can't protect those at all. And then there's this tricky middle ground with descriptive names. Something like Calvin Klein is just a person's name, right? So to get protection, it has to achieve what's called secondary meaning. That's that magic moment when the public hears the name and they don't think of the person anymore, they think of the brand. Okay, so if a trademark protects your brand's identity, what protects the actual creative work itself? Your book, your song, your movie? Well, that brings us to our second tool, copyright. And this is where we run into one of the most misunderstood concepts in all of intellectual property, that critical difference between an idea and the expression of that idea. Think of it this way. The idea of a story about a man who turns to a life of crime after a parent's death, that is not protectable. Anyone can write that story. But the specific expression of it, your unique characters, your plot twists, the dialogue, the mood you create, that is what copyright law is designed to protect. And what you get with that protection, it's a pretty big deal. You get the exclusive right to control how your work is copied, distributed, displayed, and even used to create new derivative works. And get this, it's not for just a few years. It lasts for your entire lifetime, plus another 70 years after that. A perfect real-world example of this is a case involving the rapper 50 Cent. An author sued him, claiming that his album and a film he was involved in copied her book. So the court looked at both, and they said, yeah, okay, they share a similar theme of street life, but the expression, the specific characters, the plot points, the overall mood, totally different. And just like that, case dismissed. It's a textbook example of that crucial line between an idea that anyone can use and an expression that only you own. All right, but what if your idea isn't a brand name or a story? What if it's a physical invention, a new gadget, or maybe even a secret formula? For that, we need two very different tools from our toolbox, patents and trade secrets. So a patent is this really powerful deal you make with the government. In exchange for you explaining how your invention works, they give you an exclusive temporary monopoly on it. Now, to get one, your invention has to be new, useful, and not something that would be obvious to someone else in the field. So how long does that monopoly last? For a standard utility patent, it's 20 years from the day you file your application. That's 2 whole decades where you, and only you, have the right to make, use, and sell your invention. But, and this is a really big but, after those 20 years are up, the patent expires and your invention enters the public domain. Then it's fair game for anyone to use. But getting a patent isn't your only move. This leads to a huge fork in the road for every inventor. Do you go for a patent or do you treat it as a trade secret? With a patent, you have to publicly disclose exactly how your invention works, but in return, you get 20 years of ironclad protection. Even if someone else invents the same thing independently, they can't use it. The other path is the trade secret. Think the Coca-Cola formula. You protect it by keeping it a secret. That protection can last forever. But here's the catch. If a competitor buys your product and legally figures out how to make it, what we call reverse engineering, you have zero protection. It's a massive strategic choice.
So all these tools are fantastic for protecting your work in your home country, but we live in a global world, right? What happens when your brand, your book, or your invention goes global? How do you stop a copycat on the other side of the planet? Well, the good news is you don't have to start from square one in every single country. Over the last century, this whole web of international agreements has been created to help out. For instance, the Berne Convention automatically extends your copyright protection to over 170 other countries. The Madrid Protocol makes it way easier to register a trademark internationally. These agreements are like a global safety net, making it possible for a creator in one country to have their rights respected pretty much everywhere else. And all of this brings us right to the bleeding edge of today's challenges. You know, the framework we've just discussed was built for a world of printing presses and factories. But what happens now? In a world with AI that can generate art and code in seconds, and where ideas can be shared globally in an instant, the old toolbox is really being put to the test. So the big question for all of us is, how do these tools need to change to protect the next great idea and the next generation of innovators?